This is a production of Cornell University.
Okay, because what I'd like to do now is I'd like to shift concepts, and I want to start us talking on soil ecology. You good with that? Okay. All right, so this is the first of two lectures that's going to be on soil ecology, and this lecture basically has this particular lecture has basically three goals. One is to give you an idea about the diversity of the organisms that are there. Okay. The second thing is really sort of give you an idea about, yes, we have this diversity, but because of this diversity, we have a lot of different things that are going on. Okay? And I want to give you an idea about how that diversity actually affects all of the processes that are going on in the soil systems. Okay? And the last thing I want to give you the last thing that this lecture is about is in essence a perspective on how we look at things. Because you can certainly imagine the way you look at something is based on what you're interested in. Okay? And I'm going to be talking about 4 different ways of looking at something. All right? But let's take the first 3 slides and sort of talk about what soil ecology is, or sort of give you a sort of an overview. Okay? I use this slide to basically give you an idea about where distribution is. Okay, if we think about this is relative biomass concentration down here from 0 to 100%, and this is basically depth from the soil surface downward. Okay, and a number of different types of faunal groups. Okay, algae, mesofauna, fungi, bacteria, as well as plant roots. Okay, and you can see at the surfaces have very, very high concentrations of these organisms. And as I move down to the soil profile, this concentration is greatly reduced. Now, the reality is that we have found organisms miles down in the planet, okay, mostly I think strictly microbial populations, primarily lithotrophs. But for most extensive purposes, the vast majority of the organisms that we're going to be talking about today are really sitting way up at the surface. Okay? Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, but just where things are. Now, where things are is one thing, but we also want to talk about relative abundance in the actual biomass. And this is a slide that's from your book. Okay, and what you're looking at here is a number of different types of organisms from a lot of different sort of bacteria, different kingdoms and all different kinds of stuff. What you're looking at here, though, is number versus biomass. Now, the take-home message from the slide is basically this sentence up here. If we're looking at metabolic activity being a measurement of things that are happening in soils, basically 2 groups sort of rule what's going on. Okay, the first group is basically the bacteria group, sort of sitting in here. And the last one is basically earthworms, basically sitting down here. Okay, 2 extremes. Okay, well, why do we say that? Well, you sort of think of biomass as an indicator of metabolic activity. Okay, so how much of an organism is there is a fairly good indicator of how much it's doing in that system. Now, you could have a lot of a little thing, or you could have one really gigantic thing. Okay, now, do you guys remember me drawing something that looked like this? Okay, and this was CO2. If I do this right, CO2, and I think this is generally a time domain. Okay, and I always we added this as well. You add organic matter here, and you see a response. Okay, and you have some sort of baseline respiration, CO2, and then I add a food stock, and all of a sudden I see some sort of bulge like this. Okay, and then as the food stock gets eaten up, the CO2 level comes back down, and basically where it started again. Okay, now this is a measure of CO2 evolution, which is basically a measurement of respiration. But in a sense, this is metabolic activity. The organism is doing something. That's metabolic activity. I'm using CO2 evolution as a representation of that metabolic activity. Now, do you guys remember me saying, when we drew this could be a lot of organisms doing a lot of work, or this could be one really large organism doing all by himself? Well, that's that slide. Okay? If we look at the biomass, the actual cumulative biomass of all these organisms that are there, the two largest communities that are doing most of the stuff are the microbial community and the worms. Okay? There may only be one worm, but it's rather large. Now, the last slide that I use for this introduction is this. This is another slide that's right out of your book. And I throw this in here because it serves a couple of purposes. It's lacking in some things because it certainly doesn't reflect the number, but it does sort of reflect the diversity. Okay? You see what's in, this is a slide that's just sort of little pictures of all different types of organisms that are in that system. Okay? And it gives you an idea about their proximity and sort of, what's there, and sort of a scale issue. Okay? It's just basically a nice little picture that just gives you that idea. Okay? These organisms are there. Diverse numbers, diverse biomass, and they're pretty much concentrated at the surface. Okay? Questions? Pretty good? Good start? All right. Now, let's take a next step. If we're interested in organisms, if we're interested in some sort of function that these organisms are, we're going to look at them in a particular way. And as soil scientists and ecologists and basically people that are looking at organisms, we basically look at things in 4 different ways. And these are the 4 ways. We'll look at things based on their size, how big something is. We'll also look at them sort of in their RNA sequences, sort of the phylogeny, sort of the spectrum, sort of evolutionary, how taxonomy, how things are connected, how they're linked. Okay? We also look at things based on their energy sources. What are they eating? How are they getting their energy? Okay? And then we also look at things in their trophic levels. Okay? What trophic level? Are they primary producers, secondary consumers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, detritivores? Okay? And if you think about that, if you think about how we classify or look at things, it gives you an idea about what we're interested in, but it also gives you an idea about what they're doing, what the organisms that we're interested in are doing. Okay?
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.